Hello everyone, this is Mr. Laubach. Hope you're having a great day. In this video, I'm going to introduce American imperialism, which lasted from the latter portion of the 19th century to the earlier portions of the 20th century. In this video, we will discuss imperialism versus isolationism, the two foreign policy main philosophies, the reasons for American imperialism, the American annexations of Hawaii and Alaska. The Spanish-American War was a very important part of imperialism for America. We will talk more about this in another video. So here we go. First, isolationism versus imperialism. When the U.S. was in its infancy following the Revolutionary War, the U.S. chose to stay out of European affairs as our country grew in size and strength. The common feeling was that the United States was not mature enough in order to participate in imperialism. By the later 1800s, the U.S. was emerging as a world power. However, the question of which foreign policy to adopt became a very debated topic as the U.S. grew in power. First, let's talk about isolationism. Isolationism was a foreign policy of non-interaction with other nations, staying out of alliances and other economic and political relations with foreign nations. Now, isolationism was a philosophy that was advocated most notably by Jefferson and Washington. So this was often referred to as neutrality. Imperialism, a foreign policy of forcefully extending authority over other nations, either through territorial gain or economic and political dominance. Imperialism is sometimes called interventionism as well. It should be noted that American imperialism did not necessarily mean acquiring colonies or territories and becoming imperialistic leaders, but instead developing an advantageous economic relationship with poorer countries. So this is the main difference between isolationism and imperialism. Reasons for American imperialism. So why imperialism for the United States? The APUSH curriculum cites four main American imperialist reasons, which are, of course, oversimplified, but we'll talk about each one of them. Prior to the U.S. imperialism period, the push westward was the focus of U.S. expansion in continental North America, not other parts of the world. When we think of U.S. expansion, we should think of the Caribbean, Central America, and the Pacific Ocean. The U.S. wanted to compete with the rest of the world. The U.S. now saw itself as a world power, and at the time, that is what world powers do, is they become imperial countries. First, for some philosophies. Now, we've already talked about a couple of these earlier on. Manifest destiny. So now manifest destiny did not just mean to the Pacific Ocean, but it actually went beyond. Social Darwinism, or the survival of the fittest, extended beyond U.S. borders. This became known as international Darwinism. Once again, that was the Herbert Spencer philosophy, where only the fittest survived, and this was something that not only was used as a rationale for free market economy and capitalism, but also for the push into the United States becoming an imperial power. Frederick Jackson Turner, remember, he said that the frontier was closed. So that meant that if the United States wanted to expand somewhere, it had to go beyond its current borders. And he argued that it was very much in the American spirit that the U.S. always wanted to expand. So this natural extension became imperialism. The Reverend Josiah Strong in Our Country, he stated that Anglo-Saxon or American society is superior and it should be spread. So not only did the United States have a right to spread, but it actually had an obligation to do so. Expansion of markets and access to more raw materials. Railroads created a national market, and with the growing amount of industry in production in the United States, there was a desire to create an international market. So no longer was the market here in the United States enough. Many people believed they had to expand their markets to fulfill its ultimate capability. Another reason to expand Christianity. So missionaries were very popular at the time. In other words, endeavors by Christians to go to other parts of the country and the world that were not Christian to try to spread Christianity. So we don't think of them much anymore, but that was a very important part of America during this time. And last but not least, naval bases or military bases. Alfred T. Mahan wrote The Influence of Sea Power on History in 1890, and he said that a nation needs a strong navy to be a world power. Great example of this would be the annexation of Hawaii and the building of the Panama Canal. So he believed it was important to have a strong navy not only to protect the country, but also to protect its trade interests throughout the world. So the push for naval dominance was also a cause of American imperialism. And last but not least, Alaska and Hawaii. In 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska as the last piece of available land in North America. Russia really wanted to sell Alaska, and Secretary of State Seward convinced Congress to purchase it for $7.2 million. Now, as you know, Alaska is very large, so this became quite the real estate deal. This was known as Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox, as it was seen by many as a mistake at the time. Now, keep in mind that people did not know there were so many natural resources in Alaska at the time. It was seen as just a frozen wasteland, basically. So many people ridiculed Seward for this, but of course, this ended up being quite a purchase for the United States. The annexation of Hawaii in 1898. Pearl Harbor was an ideal naval base station as it was great for refueling halfway through the Pacific. A U.S. treaty earlier in 1887 established Pearl Harbor as a naval base. Now, the conditions and depth of the water made for a perfect natural naval base. Of course, Pearl Harbor later on in history became the site of the attack of the Japanese. Americans used access to Hawaii also as a way to convert people to Christianity. So they tried to convert the native Hawaiians to Christianity. And again, this was a big part of American society, missionaries at the time. American planters bought up a bunch of the land in Hawaii. Now, Hawaii was an excellent climate and soil conditions for planting things like bananas, sugarcane, and pineapple. The Dole family, which we oftentimes will see on our fruit labels, they were a big family and very influential in Hawaii. American planters eventually would orchestrate a revolt against Queen Liliuokalani in 1893, further giving the United States more access to Hawaii and eventually leading to a complete takeover. In 1959, Hawaii would become the 50th U.S. state, a year after Alaska became the 49th. Keep in mind, too, when we're talking about new territory being gained by the United States, the typical progression is annexation to being declared a territory to gaining statehood. So both Alaska and Hawaii followed these steps as an example.